In the unforgiving heat of the 1880s frontier, a 17-year-old drifter with nothing but the clothes on his back found a blind 8-year-old girl wandering alone in the desert, lost and near death. He shared his last piece of hardtack with her and carried her through 15 miles of scorching badlands to bring her home. By sunrise, when armed riders from her father's ranch surrounded him with rifles drawn, no one knew she was the daughter of the most powerful cattle baron in 3 territories, and what happened next would change his life forever. The frontier was cruel, but not in a way that offered second chances. The frontier was cruel, but not in a way that offered second chances. Dust Creek wasn't much of a town, just a scattered collection of weathered buildings clinging to existence on the edge of the Badlands. Wooden storefronts leaned at odd angles, their paint long since stripped away by sandstorms and scorching sun. The saloon's piano played off-key through cracked windows, competing with the sound of horses stamping in the dirt and men arguing over card games that always ended the same way, with someone losing more than they could afford. The sun hung low and merciless, turning the main street into a ribbon of baked earth and scattered tumbleweeds. Merchants closed their shutters early to keep the heat out. Cowboys rode through without stopping, eyes fixed on somewhere better, somewhere that wasn't here. And along the edges of it all, invisible to those who mattered, moved Ezra Cole. 17 years old, thin as a rail, with sun-darkened skin and clothes that had seen better years. His hat was more holes than fabric, brim frayed and bent. His boots, stolen from a dead man outside Silver Ridge 2 winters back, were held together with strips of leather he'd tied himself. The soles flapped when he walked, but they were better than nothing. His shirt, once white, now carried the stains of every odd job he'd ever worked. Dust, sweat, blood from a bar fight he didn't start, grease from a wagon axle he'd fixed for a man who never paid him. Ezra had no home, no family waiting anywhere, just a bedroll tied to his back and a canteen that rattled empty most days. He drifted from ranch to ranch, town to town, picking up work where he could, mucking stables, mending fences, hauling water, the kind of labor that broke your back and paid in scraps, if it paid at all. Most folks didn't look at him twice. To them, he was just another drifter, another nobody passing through on his way to nowhere. The shop owners watched him like a hawk when he walked past their windows. The sheriff told him more than once to keep moving. Even the other ranch hands, men just as broke and desperate as he was, kept their distance. There was a hierarchy out here, and Ezra was at the bottom of it. He'd learned not to expect much. A dry place to sleep was luxury. A real meal, the kind with meat and beans that weren't spoiled, that was a memory. Mostly he survived on what he could find or trade for. Stale biscuits from the back of the general store. Jerky so tough it hurt his teeth. Once, a ranch cook had given him half a tin of peaches, and he'd eaten it so slowly, savoring every bite, that it lasted him 2 days. Today had been no different. He'd spent the morning at the edge of town, repairing a broken wagon wheel for a freight driver who'd promised him 50 cents. By the time Ezra finished, the man claimed he didn't have the money and rode off, leaving Ezra standing in the dust with nothing but sore hands and the taste of disappointment he'd grown used to. Now, as the sun dipped lower and the sky turned the color of burnt copper, Ezra made his way toward the old supply depot on the south end of Dust Creek. It had been abandoned for years, ever since the railroad changed route, but the roof still held, and sometimes you could find rats or rabbits nearby to catch if you were quiet enough. He moved through the narrow alleys behind the buildings, avoiding the main street where people might tell him to leave. His stomach growled, empty since yesterday. He'd drunk from a horse trough earlier just to quiet the ache, but water only went so far. The depot loomed ahead, a skeletal structure of rotting wood and rusted nails. Ezra ducked under a broken beam and stepped inside, letting the shade wash over him. It smelled like old hay and something dead, but it was cooler here and that was enough. He set down his bedroll and leaned against the wall, closing his eyes for just a moment. That's when he heard it, a sound, faint, like something between a whimper and a breath. Ezra's eyes snapped open. He stayed perfectly still, listening. Out here, sounds meant something. A rattlesnake coiled in the corner, a coyote looking for scraps. Or worse, someone else who'd claimed this space first and didn't take kindly to sharing. The sound came again, softer this time, but unmistakable. A child's voice, quiet and broken. He pushed himself off the wall and moved carefully through the depot's interior, boots crunching on broken glass and scattered debris. The light filtering through the gaps in the roof cast long shadows across the dirt floor. In the far corner, behind a toppled stack of crates, he saw movement. Ezra stopped. His hand instinctively went to the small knife at his belt, not to use it, but just to feel something solid. Then he saw her. A little girl, maybe 7 or 8 years old, curled up against the wall like a frightened animal. Her dress had once been fine, he could tell that much. Light blue calico with small white flowers stitched along the hem. But now it was torn and filthy, covered in dust and dark stains that might have been blood. Her hair, blonde and tangled, hung in matted clumps around her face. Her arms were covered in scratches, some fresh, some scabbed over. Her feet were bare, swollen and cut, but it was her eyes that stopped him cold. They stared straight ahead, unblinking, unfocused. She didn't turn toward him even though he'd made noise. She just sat there, trembling, hands gripping the edge of a broken crate like it was the only solid thing left in the world. "Hey," Ezra said quietly, keeping his distance. "You all right?" She flinched at his voice, but didn't look at him. Her head tilted slightly, listening. "I'm not going to hurt you," he added, crouching down slowly. "Just want to make sure you're okay." For a long moment she said nothing. Then, in a voice so small it barely reached him, she whispered, "Where am I?" Ezra's chest tightened. "You're in Dust Creek, the old depot on the south side. How'd you get here?" She shook her head, tears starting to roll down her cheeks, cutting clean lines through the dirt on her face. "I don't know. I got lost. I can't see." Ezra felt something twist inside him. He'd seen plenty of hard things in his life. Men shot over card games, horses put down in the street, families evicted from their homes with nothing but the shirts on their backs. But this, a blind child, alone and hurt in a place like this, it hit different. He moved a little closer, keeping his voice steady. "What's your name?" She hesitated, then whispered, "Lily." "Lily," he repeated, softer now. "That's a real pretty name. I'm Ezra." She didn't respond, just kept trembling. Her lips were cracked and dry, and he could see her breathing was shallow, labored. "When's the last time you had water?" he asked. She shook her head again. "I don't remember." Ezra glanced down at his canteen. It was nearly empty, maybe a few swallows left. He'd been saving it, planning to refill it at the creek outside town tomorrow morning. But looking at her now, small and fragile and fading, he knew he couldn't wait. He unscrewed the cap and moved closer, kneeling beside her. "Here," he said gently, "drink this." Lily turned her head toward his voice, hesitant. He guided the canteen to her lips, and she drank slowly, carefully, like she was afraid it might disappear. When she finished, she pulled back and wiped her mouth with a shaky hand. "Thank you," she whispered. Ezra screwed the cap back on and set the empty canteen aside. He studied her for a moment, trying to piece together how a girl like this ended up here. Her dress, even torn and dirty, was made from good fabric. Her hands, though scratched, weren't calloused like a worker's. She didn't belong in a place like Dust Creek. "You got family nearby?" he asked. Lily's face crumpled, and she started to cry again. "I don't know where they are. I got separated. I've been walking for so long, and I don't know where I am." Ezra sat back on his heels, running a hand through his hair. He didn't know what to do. He barely had enough to keep himself alive, let alone take care of someone else. But he couldn't just leave her here. "All right," he said quietly. "You're safe now. I'm gonna help you." Ezra looked around the abandoned depot, scanning for anything useful. There wasn't much. A few broken crates, some frayed rope hanging from a beam, and a torn piece of canvas in the corner that might have once been part of a wagon cover. He grabbed the canvas and shook the dust off, then brought it over to where Lily sat. "Here," he said softly, draping it over her shoulders like a blanket. "It ain't much, but it'll keep the chill off when the sun goes down." She pulled it tighter around herself, nodding slightly. Her trembling had eased just a little, but she still looked terrified, like the world had become a dark maze she couldn't escape. Ezra sat down beside her, keeping a respectful distance. He reached into the small leather pouch tied to his belt, the one that held everything he owned of value. His fingers found what he was looking for, a piece of hardtack wrapped in cloth. He'd gotten it 3 days ago from a ranch cook in exchange for chopping wood. It was hard as a rock and tasted like nothing, but it was food, and it was all he had. He unwrapped it carefully and broke it in half. The sound echoed in the quiet space. He looked at the two pieces in his hands, one slightly larger than the other. His stomach growled in protest, reminding him he hadn't eaten since yesterday morning. But when he looked at Lily, small and broken and lost, the choice was easy. He held out the larger piece toward her. "You need to eat something." Lily turned her head toward his voice, hesitant. "I don't want to take your food." "You're not taking it," Ezra said. "I'm giving it to you. There's a difference." She reached out slowly, fingers searching the air until they found his hand. She took the hardtack gently, like it was made of glass, and brought it to her mouth. She bit down carefully, struggling with how hard it was, then chewed slowly. Tears started rolling down her cheeks again. "You okay?" Ezra asked. She nodded, still chewing. "It's just, I haven't eaten in so long. I thought..." Her voice broke. "I thought I was going to die out here." Ezra looked down at his own piece of hardtack, then slipped it back into the pouch. He wasn't that hungry anyway, he told himself. He'd gone longer without food before. "You're not going to die," he said firmly. "Not while I'm here." They sat in silence for a while. Outside, the sounds of Dust Creek faded as the sun dipped lower. A dog barked somewhere in the distance. Boots scraped across wooden planks. A door slammed. Life went on, indifferent and relentless. Lily finished eating and wiped her mouth with the back of her hand. "Ezra?" "Yeah?" "Why are you helping me?" The question caught him off guard. He thought about it for a moment, staring at a crack in the wall, where light seeped through. Why was he helping her? He had nothing. No money, no home, no future to speak of. Helping her wouldn't change that. If anything, it made his situation worse. But when he looked at her, sitting there in his canvas blanket, blind and alone and trusting him with everything she had, he knew the answer. "Because somebody should," he said simply. "And right now, I'm the only somebody here." Lily's face softened, and for the first time since he'd found her, she almost smiled. "My papa used to say that good people are the ones who help even when it's hard." "Your papa sounds like a smart man," Ezra said. "Where is he now?" Her face fell again. "I don't know. We were traveling, and something happened. There were men, bad men, and shooting, and I got separated from everyone. I ran, and then I couldn't find my way back. I've been lost for 2 days, I think. Maybe more." Ezra's jaw tightened. Men with guns. That usually meant bandits or rustlers, the kind who didn't care who got hurt. If they'd attacked her family's wagon, there was no telling what had happened. "Do you remember anything else, Vito?" he asked. "Anything about where you were going, or where you came from?" Lily thought for a moment, her brow furrowing. "We were going to Red Rock Pass. Papa said we had to get there before nightfall, but I don't know if we made it." Red Rock Pass. Ezra knew it. It was about 15 miles northeast of Dust Creek, a narrow canyon that cut through the Badlands. Dangerous territory, especially at night. "What about your home?" he asked. "You remember where that is?" "The ranch," Lily said quietly. "The Iron T. Papa owns it. It's big, really big, but I don't know how to get there from here." The Iron T. Ezra's blood went cold. Everyone in 3 territories knew that name. Ezra stared at her, the words hanging in the air like smoke from a gunshot. The Iron T. Samuel Thornton's ranch. The biggest cattle operation west of the Mississippi, spanning thousands of acres across the Badlands and beyond. Thornton was a legend, a man who'd built an empire from nothing, who commanded respect and fear in equal measure. His riders were known throughout the territory, loyal to a fault and quick with their guns when crossed. And this little girl, sitting beside him in a torn dress with dirt on her face, was his daughter. Ezra's mind raced. He'd heard stories about Thornton. Some said he was fair, that he paid his men well and treated them square. Others whispered darker things, that he'd run out settlers with violence, that he'd bought lawmen and judges, that crossing him was a death sentence. Ezra had never met the man, never worked for him. Ranch hands like Ezra didn't get jobs at places like the Iron T. They hired experienced cowboys, not drifters. "You're Samuel Thornton's daughter," Ezra said, more to himself than to her. Lily nodded. "Do you know him?" "Know of him," Ezra said carefully. "Everyone does." She pulled the canvas tighter around her shoulders. "He's probably looking for me. Papa doesn't stop until he finds what he's looking for." Ezra believed that. If Thornton's daughter had gone missing, he'd have every rider on his payroll searching. They'd be combing the territory, checking every town, every trail, every ranch within 100 miles. And if they thought someone had taken her, if they thought someone had hurt her, God help that person. A cold thought settled in Ezra's gut. If Thornton's men found him with Lily, alone in an abandoned depot, would they ask questions first? Or would they see a vagrant with a missing girl and draw their own conclusions? He stood up abruptly, pacing a few steps away. His hand ran through his hair as he tried to think. He could leave her here, slip out before anyone found them, let someone else deal with it. It would be safer that way, for him at least. But even as the thought crossed his mind, he knew he couldn't do it. She was blind, injured, terrified. Leaving her would be the same as killing her. "Ezra?" Lily's voice was small, uncertain. "Are you still there?" "I'm here," he said, turning back to her. "Just thinking." "About what?" "About how to get you home." Lily's face brightened with hope. "You know where it is?" "Not exactly," Ezra admitted, "but I know it's northeast of here, past Red Rock Pass, maybe 15, 20 miles through rough country." Her hope dimmed. "That's so far." "Yeah," Ezra said quietly. "It is." He looked out through a gap in the depot wall. The sun was almost gone now, the sky painted in shades of orange and deep purple. Night was coming fast, and with it the cold. The Badlands were unforgiving after dark. Temperatures dropped, predators came out, and the trails became treacherous even for those who could see. There was no way they could make the journey tonight. Not with Lily barefoot and exhausted, not with him already running on empty. They'd have to wait until morning, leave at first light when they had the full day ahead of them. But that meant staying here, in Dust Creek, where questions might come, where Thornton's riders might already be searching. Ezra made his decision. "We'll leave at sunrise," he said, crouching back down beside her. "It's too dangerous to travel at night, especially through the Badlands. We'll rest here tonight, and in the morning I'll take you home." "You'll really do that?" Lily asked, her voice thick with emotion. "You'll take me all the way there?" "I will," Ezra said. "I promise." She reached out, her small hand searching until it found his. She squeezed it gently. "Thank you, Ezra. I don't know what I would have done without you." Ezra squeezed back, his throat tight. "Don't thank me yet. We've got a long walk ahead of us." but inside he was already counting the cost. 15 miles through desert heat with no water, no food, and no guarantee they'd even make it. He'd be carrying her most of the way, he knew that much. Her feet wouldn't last a mile on that terrain, and when they arrived, if they arrived, he'd be handing her over to one of the most powerful men in the territory, a man who might reward him or might just as easily have him shot for being in the wrong place at the wrong time. But none of that mattered right now. Right now, a little girl needed help, and Ezra Cole had never been good at walking away. Dawn broke cold and pale over Dust Creek, the sky a washed-out gray that promised heat by mid-morning. Ezra had barely slept, keeping one eye open through the night, listening for sounds that didn't belong. Twice he'd heard footsteps outside the depot, but both times they'd passed without stopping. Now, as the first light crept through the broken roof, he gently shook Lily awake. "Time to go," he said softly. She stirred, blinking those unseeing eyes, and for a moment she looked lost again, like she'd forgotten where she was. Then recognition settled across her face. "Ezra?" "Right here. We need to get moving before the sun gets too high." He'd already packed what little they had. The canvas blanket was folded and tied to his bedroll. His empty canteen hung from his belt, a cruel reminder of what they didn't have. There was a creek about 3 miles northeast, if it hadn't dried up. They'd have to make it that far first. Lily tried to stand, but her legs buckled. Ezra caught her before she fell. "My feet," she whispered, pain tight in her voice. He looked down. Her feet were worse than yesterday, swollen and raw, caked with dried blood. There was no way she could walk, not even 100 yards. "It's all right," Ezra said. "I'll carry you." "The whole way?" "The whole way." He crouched down, and she climbed onto his back, arms wrapping around his neck, legs around his waist. She was light, too light for a girl her age, like she'd been going hungry even before she got lost. But Ezra knew that by mile 10, she'd feel like she weighed 100 pounds. By mile 15, he'd barely feel his legs at all. They left the depot and headed northeast, skirting the edge of town to avoid questions. The main street was just waking up. A shopkeeper swept his porch. Smoke rose from the blacksmith's forge. A woman hung laundry in her yard, humming a hymn that drifted on the breeze. No one saw them leave. The land opened up quickly once they passed the last building, stretching into endless plains of dust and scrub brush. The trail to Red Rock Pass was barely visible, just a suggestion of packed earth where wagons had passed years ago. Ezra followed it as best he could, marking his path by distant rock formations and the position of the sun. By the second mile, sweat was already soaking through his shirt. The temperature was climbing fast, and there wasn't a cloud in the sky to offer shade. His boots kicked up small clouds of dust with each step. His legs burned, but he kept moving, counting his steps to keep his mind occupied. 100, 200, 300. Lily was quiet on his back, her cheek resting against his shoulder. Sometimes she'd ask a question. "What do you see? How much farther?" And he'd answer simply, honestly, because she deserved that much. "Rocks and dust," he'd say. "A whole lot of nothing. Still a long way to go." By mile 3 they reached the creek, or what used to be a creek. Now it was just a dry bed of cracked mud and scattered stones. Ezra stood there, staring at it, his throat already scratchy from thirst. "Is there water?" Lily asked hopefully. "No," he said quietly. "It's dried up." He felt her grip tighten around his neck. Neither of them said what they were both thinking. Without water, this journey just became a lot more dangerous. Ezra adjusted her weight and kept walking. The sun climbed higher. The heat became oppressive, pressing down on them like a physical weight. Ezra's vision started to blur at the edges. His tongue felt thick in his mouth. Every step was deliberate now, conscious effort instead of rhythm. By mile 7, he stumbled for the first time, catching himself before they both went down. "Ezra?" Lily's voice was small, scared. "I'm okay," he lied. "Just a rock." But he wasn't okay. His head was pounding. His legs shook with each step. The straps of his bedroll cut into his shoulders. His lips were cracked and bleeding. Still, he kept walking. By mile 10, the landscape began to change. The flat plains gave way to rolling hills dotted with larger rocks and sparse Joshua trees. In the distance, he could see the dark outline of Red Rock Pass, a jagged canyon cutting through the hills like a scar. They were halfway there. Ezra allowed himself to stop, just for a moment, leaning against a boulder that offered a sliver of shade. He let Lily down gently, and she sat beside him, both of them breathing hard. "How are you doing?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "Thirsty," she admitted, "really thirsty." "Me too." He looked back the way they'd come. Dust Creek was long gone, invisible behind the hills. There was no turning back now. Forward was the only option. After a few minutes, Ezra stood again. "Ready?" Lily nodded and climbed back onto his back without complaint. They pushed on into the afternoon heat, two small figures against an endless, unforgiving horizon. The Iron T Ranch appeared like a mirage in the late afternoon sun. Ezra crested the final hill, legs trembling, vision swimming, and there it was spread out below him. A sprawling compound of buildings, corrals filled with horses, cattle grazing in distant pastures that seemed to stretch forever. The main house stood at the center, 2 stories of whitewashed wood and stone with a wide porch wrapping around the front. Even from a distance, it looked like something out of a dream. Solid, permanent, wealthy. Ezra had made it. Somehow, against all reason, he'd carried Lily 15 miles through the Badlands without water, without rest, without anything but sheer, stubborn will. His shirt was soaked through with sweat. His legs barely responded to commands anymore. His lips were split and bleeding, and he was pretty sure he'd lost a toenail somewhere around mile 12. But Lily was alive. That's what mattered. "We're here," he croaked, his voice barely recognizable. Lily stirred on his back, lifting her head. "Really?" "Yeah, I can see the ranch." She let out a sob of relief, her arms tightening around his neck. "Papa, I want my papa." Ezra started down the hill, each step a small agony. As they got closer, he could see men moving around the property. Ranch hands going about their work, but something was different. There were more of them than normal, and they were armed. Rifles slung over shoulders, revolvers on hips. The whole place had the feel of a fortress on alert. They were looking for her. They'd been looking for days. Ezra reached the main gate, an impressive iron structure with the Iron T brand worked into the metalwork. Beyond it, the main house loomed. He stopped, suddenly uncertain. His hand reached up to adjust Lily's position one more time, and that's when the shout came. "Hold it right there." 3 men emerged from the barn to his left, rifles already raised. They moved with practiced precision, fanning out to cover different angles. Behind them, more men appeared. Within seconds, Ezra was surrounded by at least a dozen armed ranch hands, all of them pointing guns at his chest. "Don't move," one of them barked. He was older, with a gray beard and hard eyes. The foreman, Ezra guessed. Dutch, if the stories were right. Ezra raised his hand slowly, careful not to dislodge Lily. "I'm not here to cause trouble." "Then what are you doing with that girl?" Dutch demanded, stepping closer, rifle never wavering. "Her name is Lily," Ezra said, his voice steady despite his exhaustion. "Lily Thornton. I found her in Dust Creek. I brought her home." The men exchanged glances. Dutch's eyes narrowed. "Put her down," slowly. Ezra carefully crouched, letting Lily slide off his back. She stood on unsteady legs, still holding on to his shirt. "It's okay," Ezra whispered to her. "You're home now." "Miss Lily?" Dutch lowered his rifle slightly, moving closer. His hard expression cracked when he saw her face, dirty and tear-streaked, her feet bloody and bare. Jesus Christ, it's really her. Get Mr. Thornton, someone shouted. Now. Boots pounded on wood. A door slammed open, and then a man appeared on the porch, tall and broad-shouldered, his face lined with days of sleepless worry. Samuel Thornton took the steps 3 at a time, his eyes locked on the small figure standing beside Ezra. Lily? His voice broke on her name. Papa. She let go of Ezra and stumbled forward, arms outstretched. Thornton caught her, dropping to his knees and pulling her into his arms. He held her like she might disappear again, his whole body shaking. My baby girl, my baby girl. The ranch hands lowered their weapons, some of them turning away, wiping at their eyes. Ezra stood there, swaying slightly, watching the reunion. His job was done. Lily was safe. That's all he'd promised. He took a step backward, then another. Nobody noticed. All eyes were on Thornton and his daughter. The foreman had moved closer to check on Lily. Other men crowded around, relief and joy on their weathered faces. Ezra took another step back, then turned toward the gate. His legs nearly gave out, but he forced them to move, one foot in front of the other. He'd done what needed doing. Now it was time to disappear, like he always did, back to the nothing he came from. He made it 10 yards before his vision tunneled and his knees buckled. The last thing he heard before the darkness took him was someone shouting, "The boy. Someone catch the boy." Then everything went black. Ezra woke to softness. That was the first thing his mind registered. Not hard ground or splintered wood, but something yielding beneath his back. Clean sheets. A real mattress. For a moment he thought he was dreaming or dead. He wasn't sure which seemed more likely. His eyes opened slowly, adjusting to dim lamplight. He was in a bedroom, a real bedroom, with papered walls and curtains on the windows. A washstand stood in the corner with a porcelain basin. His boots sat by the door, cleaned. Someone had changed his clothes. He was wearing a cotton shirt that wasn't his, soft and unstained. Panic flickered through him. Where was he? How long had he been out? He tried to sit up, and pain lanced through his shoulders and legs. Every muscle screamed in protest. His head swam, and he fell back against the pillow with a groan. The door opened. A woman entered, middle-aged, with kind eyes and graying hair pulled back in a bun. She carried a tray with a glass of water and what looked like soup. "Easy now," she said, setting the tray on the bedside table. "You've been through hell and back. Don't go pushing yourself. Where am I?" Ezra's voice came out as a rasp. "The iron tea. You've been here 2 days." She held the glass to his lips. Drink, slowly. The water was cool and clean, the best thing Ezra had ever tasted. He drank carefully, fighting the urge to gulp it down. 2 days, were ye? He repeated when she pulled the glass away. "You collapsed at the gate. Dehydration, exhaustion, sun sickness. Doc said it's a miracle you made it as far as you did." She smiled gently. "My name's Maria. I manage the house here. Mr. Thornton asked me to look after you." "Lily," Ezra said immediately. "Is she—" "She's fine. Resting, eating, being spoiled rotten by her father." Maria's smile widened. "You saved her life, son. You know that?" Ezra didn't know what to say to that. He looked down at his hands, clean now, the dirt scrubbed away. They didn't look like the hands of someone who saved anybody. "I need to go," he said quietly. "Mr. Thornton wants to speak with you first. He's been waiting." Before Ezra could protest, Maria left and returned moments later with Samuel Thornton himself. The cattle baron filled the doorway, even bigger up close than he'd seemed from a distance. He wore a clean shirt and vest, but his face still carried the weight of the last few days, shadows under his eyes, new lines around his mouth. He stepped inside and closed the door behind him. For a long moment he just looked at Ezra. Then he pulled up a chair and sat down heavily. "You're Ezra Cole," Thornton said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, sir. Dutch told me what you did. Carried my daughter 15 miles through the Badlands with no water, no horse, nothing." His voice was rough, controlled emotion barely held in check. Why? Ezra met his gaze. Because she needed help. You could have left her. Could have taken her to the sheriff in Dust Creek. Let someone else deal with it. No, sir, I couldn't. Thornton leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Do you know who I am? What I could do for you? I know who you are, Ezra said, but I didn't do it for a reward. I know you didn't. Thornton's jaw worked. That's what my daughter kept telling me. She said you gave her your only food, your only water, that you promised to keep her safe, and you did. He paused, his eyes glistening. She said you're a good man. Ezra looked away, uncomfortable with the praise. I just did what anybody should have done. But nobody else did, Thornton said quietly. She was lost for 3 days, wandered through 2 towns, past ranches, camps, trails, and nobody stopped, nobody helped, just you. He stood up, walked to the window, looked out over his land. When he turned back, his expression had changed, harder, more determined. I've spent the last 2 days trying to figure out how to repay you. Money seemed insulting. A job felt insufficient. Then Lily told me something else. He crossed his arms. She told me you have nothing, no family, no home, that you've been drifting for years, sleeping rough, barely surviving. Ezra's throat tightened. He nodded once. That ends now, Thornton said firmly. You're not leaving this ranch. You're staying here. I'm offering you a place, not as a hand, as family. A roof, meals, a future. You gave me my daughter back. Let me give you something in return. Ezra stared at him, unable to process the words. Sir, I can't. Yes, you can. Thornton's voice softened. Lily asked for you every time she woke up. She wants you here, and frankly, so do I. This ranch needs men with character, and you've got more of it than most men I've known twice your age. Ezra felt something crack inside his chest. That wall he'd built over years of rejection and loneliness, it was crumbling. I don't know what to say, he whispered. Thornton smiled, the first real smile Ezra had seen on him. Say yes. 6 months later, the Iron Tea Ranch looked the same as it always had, vast and prosperous under the endless western sky. But for Ezra Cole, everything had changed. He stood on the porch of the main house in the early morning light, a cup of real coffee in his hands, still getting used to the taste. The sun was just beginning to paint the horizon in shades of gold and pink, and the air was cool and clean. In the distance, cattle moved slowly across the pastures, and horses nickered in the corrals. Dutch was already out there with a handful of ranch hands, preparing for the day's work. Ezra took a sip of coffee and allowed himself a moment he'd never thought he'd have. A moment of peace, of belonging. The first few weeks had been strange, almost painful. He'd waited for someone to tell him it was all a mistake, that he didn't really belong here, that he should pack his things and move on. But that moment never came. Instead, Thornton had kept his word. He'd given Ezra a room in the main house, not in the bunkhouse with the other hands. He'd bought him new clothes, real boots that fit, a hat that didn't have holes in it. He'd put food in front of him 3 times a day, more food than Ezra had seen in years, and told him to eat until he was full. It had taken time for Ezra to believe it was real, but slowly, day by day, the Iron Tea had become home. Thornton had started teaching him the business side of ranching, how to read ledgers, how to negotiate cattle prices, how to manage men. You've got a sharp mind, Thornton had told him one evening over dinner. Don't waste it just working with your hands. Learn the whole operation, and Ezra had. He soaked up every lesson like a man dying of thirst. He rode out with the hands, learning to rope and brand, to read the weather and the land. He sat with Thornton in his office, learning contracts and deals. He even started teaching himself to read better, staying up late with books from Thornton's library, sounding out words he didn't know. But the biggest change wasn't in what he learned or what he wore. It was in how people looked at him. The ranch hands respected him now. They'd heard the story, knew what he'd done, and they treated him like one of their own. Dutch, who'd been skeptical at first, had become something like a mentor, teaching Ezra the finer points of managing a crew. Even the townspeople in Dust Creek, when Ezra rode in with Thornton for supplies, tipped their hats to him instead of looking through him like he was invisible. For the first time in his life, Ezra Cole mattered. The front door opened behind him, and he turned to see Lily step out onto the porch. She was wearing a clean yellow dress, her hair brushed and tied back with a ribbon. Her face had filled out, the bruises and scratches long healed. She looked healthy, happy. Her hand found the porch railing, and she navigated confidently toward the sound of his coffee cup. "Morning, Ezra," she said brightly. "Morning, Lily," he smiled. "You're up early. I wanted to catch you before you rode out." She settled into the chair beside him. Her face turned toward the sunrise she couldn't see but could feel. "Papa said you're going to check the northern fence line today." "That's right. Dutch thinks we might have some breaks after that storm last week." "Will you tell me about it when you get back? What you see out there?" "Course I will." It had become their ritual. Ezra would ride out across the ranch, and when he returned, he'd sit with Lily and describe everything he'd seen. The way the light hit the rocks, the colors of the wildflowers starting to bloom, the shape of the clouds. He'd become her eyes in a way, painting pictures with words so she could see the world through him. "Ezra?" Lily's voice grew softer, more serious. "Yeah? Do you ever think about leaving, going back to drifting?" He was quiet for a moment, looking out over the land. A year ago, he would have said yes. Drifting was all he knew, all he thought he deserved. But now? "No," he said honestly. "I don't think about it anymore. This is home." Lily smiled, the kind of smile that lit up her whole face. "Good, because you're my brother now. You can't leave, brother." The word still caught him off guard sometimes, but it felt right. Thornton had made it official 2 months ago, sat Ezra down and told him that he was drawing up papers to make him a legal part of the family. Not adopted exactly, but recognized, protected, an heir to the ranch alongside Lily. Ezra had cried that night, alone in his room, overwhelmed by the weight of it all. The door opened again, and Thornton stepped out, already dressed for the day. He clapped a hand on Ezra's shoulder. "Ready to ride?" "Yes, sir." "Stop calling me sir," Thornton said with a slight grin. "We've been over this." Ezra smiled. "Yes, Samuel." Thornton nodded approvingly, then looked out over his land, his empire, and the boy who'd become his son. "You know, Ezra, I built this ranch from nothing, worked every day of my life to make it something that would last. But I realize now that land and cattle don't make a legacy. People do." He looked at Ezra, then at Lily. "You two, you're my legacy, and I couldn't be prouder." Ezra felt that familiar tightness in his chest, but it wasn't pain anymore. It was gratitude, it was love. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for everything." Thornton squeezed his shoulder once more, then headed down the steps toward the stables. Ezra drained the last of his coffee and set the cup down. He reached over and squeezed Lily's hand gently. "I'll be back before supper," he promised. "I'll be waiting." He stood, adjusted his hat, the good one, and walked down into the morning light. The same sun that had beaten down on him mercilessly 6 months ago now felt warm and welcoming. The same land that had tried to kill him now felt like it was holding him up. Ezra Cole had spent 17 years invisible, unwanted, surviving on scraps and hope. But not anymore. Now he was home, and he was loved. Remember to like and subscribe for more powerful stories of courage, kindness, and second chances. Hit that notification bell so you never miss a tale that reminds us all that one act of goodness can change everything.